Welcome to Lighten Up TV, evolutionary wellness for the body, mind, and spirit. We are 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. We are body, mind, and spirit. Harmonizing these 3 aspects of our being is the key to achieving total well-being. Integration is the pathway to mental, physical, and spiritual harmony, and the only way to progress on our evolutionary journey. In this series, our guest experts will show you how to purify your body, liberate your mind, and ignite your creative spirit. Are you ready to lighten up?
Doesn't that feel good? Yes. Don't ever let your ego tell you that you are anything less than perfect, because you are all that and more.
It's time to lighten up. Hello and welcome to Lighten Up TV. I'm so delighted to have our guest, Danielle Rama Hoffman, here on the show today. Danielle is an ancient wisdom keeper, as well as a divine transmitter, a member of the lineage of Thoth, and also a leader in the shift into unity consciousness. She is the author of 3 beautiful books, really a light trilogy: The Temples of Light, The Councils of Light, and her most recent book is The Tablets of Light. And I've truly enjoyed all 3 books, and it's really an honor and a privilege to introduce Danielle Rama Hoffman. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm delighted and love how you said a light trilogy, because it really is a light trilogy. I didn't plan it that way. I didn't plan it at all, but it was really that. Yeah, it is a light trilogy.
So often book series turn into trilogies. I have my own trilogy, which is called the Up Trilogy, which is Wake Up, Rise Up, and Lighten Up. But I was originally shown one 30-day book, and it seemed so overwhelming, I broke it down into 3 10-day books. So sometimes it's better to break things into, a series, but we both know that 3 is a divine number, so it's a trinity.
Yes. And following the energy is really how I love to live. And so as we're following the energy, we don't always have the full picture as to where it's headed, but each step is a part of the hologram along the way.
Yes, and speaking of holograms, that is a wonderful analogy, because each book is sort of a resemblance of the whole, just like a hologram would be. Yes, so my dear, I would like to get started by just reflecting on how at the age of 9, you were called to participate in really a horseback riding camp, and it turned into really an awakening and a connection at a young age, and the owners of that horseback riding camp became an integral part of your life and your divine calling.
Yes. And that connection as well with the horses, because horses really have this natural way of almost telepathically communicating. And so I think that being with the horses really supported me in having a way of communicating and having a response back that I wasn't necessarily noticing when I was speaking with other individuals. So the horses were very grounding. And then at the age of 9 at this horseback riding camp, I had lightning go through me, and then again at 17. And then the women that owned the camp when I was, I think, 24, ended up becoming my Reiki masters. And then that's also where I met Nikki Scully and really had my first connection to a guide. It was a workshop with Sekhmet, and I'd been a massage therapist and a counselor and, Reiki master all along the way. And yet the first time I met Sekhmet was just really like this reclaiming of an ancient connection to Egypt. And then that's where I met Thoth, or as he says, as he comes through a divine transmission, Thoth, the Egyptian god of infinite knowledge. And he's really been a primary partner for me. And really also the origin or the connection for the books and all that's come through that lineage.
Yes, and I like how you talk about it as sort of a reunion or a remembering of your lifetimes in Egypt, and how your book Temples of Light go to the various temples throughout Egypt, and then ultimately leading tours to Egypt. So a really powerful connection there. And I would love to hear what it felt like the first time that you arrived in Egypt.
Yeah, it was really, it's so interesting because I didn't really have a connection to Egypt as a child or think about it. And so like it wasn't there, and then it was there, and then it was there really strongly. And I remember that we went to watch the Sufi dancers, spinning. And after leaving the Sufi dancers and riding in the bus going back to the hotel, I really saw with my open eyes Thoth sitting in the back of the bus. And it was so it freaked me out because I'd seen him in my mind's eye. And I even asked Anubis, the jackal-headed god, opener of the way, to kind of check his ID, because I recognized the signature energy, but it was so such an intense awakening. And yeah, being in Egypt was the first time, and every time really amazing. I would have memories of kind of underneath the temples or places that weren't really open. And sometimes too, I would go and I'd go into a temple and I'd be like, I didn't really feel a lot. But then when I'd go back home, some of those temples that were kind of neutral or calm, then I would have a really strong connection to the temple. And I remember Thoth asking me and the temples, that there was a lot of information about the pantheon and the gods and goddesses, and yet there really wasn't that much about the temples. And I think the temples are such a beautiful example of evolution, because a temple is consecrated and dedicated for a certain aspect, and then maybe it's destroyed or added on to, yet the seed is always built upon those previous layers. So I think also what we would call our past lives build upon one another. And so the Temples of Light really is a journey into the heart wisdom teachings of each of the temples. And that was cool. It was kind of like using that same capacity that I learned with the horses to communicate without words, to then be communicating to the essence of the temples of light.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about the Ascension spiral in your book, and it's a heart expansion and then sort of an inner temple. And I appreciated those references, because certainly it starts with expanding, but then it's also, centering into your own heart space and your own inner temple. And I also feel a powerful connection to Egypt, and I actually have a little statue of
Oh, we're going to get our statues out here. Yeah.
Oh, look at that. Oh, that's beautiful. Yes. And was drawn to the, emerald tablets a few years ago, and really, myself felt a past life in Egypt really come to the surface and the forefront for me through meditation, and then a connection to Isis and Hathor and Sekhmet. And so when I saw your book, Temples of Light, a couple of years ago, I snatched it up and just have so enjoyed the virtual journey, through Egypt. And at each one of these temples having this really strong connection and spiritual experience. You really help the reader feel into the spiritual essence of each of the temples. And then, of course, you do a practice at each of the temples. So thank you for offering your readers a virtual journey into Egypt and a spiritual activation at each of the temples. That's so powerful. Can you tell me how you were inspired to create that?
Yes, well, really it was the request as well from the temples and from Thoth, and to really be connecting with each of the temples along the Nile, and that the temples are really built as a reflection of the cosmos, and sometimes the Nile is referred to as like the Milky Way, and that the story, as you know, of Isis and Osiris being dismembered, like really succinctly the story, into 14 different parts, and then Isis building a temple at each place. And so it's really this journey along the Nile, a journey of remembering ourselves as well, as you spoke about the Ascension spiral. And I think that was an important point that you're bringing forward, because to me it is this ascension descension spiral that we need to take all of us with us. And so when I first started, meditating, I don't know, 30 years ago or 25 years ago or something like that, there was a lot of kind of going out of the body. And then for me, it was so important to go within, and the Emerald Tablets as well talk about that, as above, so below, as within, so without. Yet that recognition of that we have everything within us, and that for me as well, and I think this is something you talk about too, that there was this time where I was really called to get my body online and move and exercise, and rather than going out there, really going deep within. And then there's a deeper connection to source consciousness. And so, I think the book also really supports with that ascension descension spiral, and ensuring that as we evolve in our consciousness, that we're bringing all of us along. And it's a remembering that it can be quite natural or innate as well.
Yes, absolutely. I so appreciate that, and a reflection on Egypt as well, with sort of the symbology around Osiris being dismembered and the 14 temples erected so that he can be remembered, and so that we can remember. And that's such a powerful symbology. And the Temple of Saqqara has always had such a powerful resonance for me. And that's really the temple of sacred symbology.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that the Temple of Saqqara is really a beautiful, and it's unlike, they're all unique, but it's unlike the other temples of really these columns of walking through, and that the initiate as well, there may have been these initiations where it was in the dark, and finding the way in the dark, and walking through the columns, like opening up the veils of the inner sight. And then there's just these beautiful chambers underground that have the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or Coming Forth by Light, the hieroglyphs on the walls. And that really is a powerful connection to be awakening that sacred symbology, and our capacity to be able to be looking at the synchronicities of our life, and see what those symbols are, to see things like in the hieroglyphs. It's multidimensional. It's not just words like we have in our language, although words, as well as they're scribed and connected to energy, can be in divine wholeness. And so really that capacity to awaken our sacred symbology, to be able to see the magic, the synchronicities, and open to that inner sight. And there's so much. I think that, I just remember being with groups and looking at the temple walls, and there's pictures as well in the Temples of Light book, in addition to like the audio CD of some of the meditations, that the pictures can spark a remembering or an awakening of capacities that we have that are quite natural, that may have been dormant or awakening. Like I remember before I had my Reiki training, I had a lot of awakening happening, but it was very confusing to me. Even though I was doing massage, I didn't really have a sense of like how to turn on the energy or how to turn off the energy. And so having context sometimes or tools can be really supportive during our awakening process, even though it's unique. Like everyone has their own pathway. We're each unique in that journey. Yet having some context or some additional capacities that come online can be really supportive.
Yes, I really like how you sort of use light, color, and sound, to activate all of the multidimensional aspects of your readers and viewers, in essence. So you use the YouTubes as a powerful audio-visual way to connect with you and to really tune into those divine transmissions. And then, of course, your books and the imagery in them, as well as all of the words. And I just think it's such a powerful way to really engage all of the senses. And I am particularly drawn to the multidimensionality that you speak of, and reuniting those multidimensional aspects of ourselves. Can you talk more about that?
Yes, that's beautiful as well. For there is this evolution in consciousness, as there's much awareness of, and that it is that shift from primarily experiencing ourselves through the filters of our body, mind, and emotions, to be experiencing ourselves as well with those filters, yet from a multidimensional level. So often the Council of Light often speak about the multidimensionality of, like, if we are a building, that we have many stories of the building, and that we can also be communicating, receiving, and transmitting multidimensionally. And so that and to not also be stopping how we're communicating based on who's around us and what dimensions they may be communicating from. And it's not like having access to more dimensions is better or worse than somebody who's not having access to the same amount of dimensions, because it's really kind of that perfect fit for each of us. And so for some, and there's a lot of talk about the fifth dimension, the fourth dimension, the third dimension, and yet for some it may be the 18th dimension, or like in the Temples of Light book, there's the meditation to the Temple of Abydos and the raising of the Djed, and how there are 33 bones in the spinal column, and this reflection of like the 33 dimensions. Or in the work that's currently been coming through Thoth, the Divine Light activation sequence, there are these 24 dimensions, and each dimension has different aspects. And so as we're living more multidimensionally, we're also resourced, remembered, and able to be communicating in interdimensional ways. And so that can look very different for individuals. And that's also, as you're referring to, the language of light that can come through, that's also a form of multidimensional communication. So to me, it's really awakening to our divine selves, that we are, from my perspective and what Thoth and the Council of Light say as well, that we are beings of light incarnate, and we're awakening to that divine wholeness. And as we're living more multidimensionally, then that also supports that process. And again, it's not that the third dimension ceases to exist, like everything is in wholeness. And yet it's not the separation of flipping back from this emotion or this thought or this body thing. It's more of the alignment and the wholeness, and then being plugged into a wider perspective. So I know there's a lot of conversations about the evolution of consciousness, the shift from separation into unity consciousness. And I know that for me, years ago, I thought it might feel like a certain way or look like a certain way. And it's continued to surprise me, because it's still like I'll have moments of separation consciousness, and yet there's a greater level of being resourced, that it's like putting food coloring into a thimble if there's fear or slower vibration. And then as we're in more unity consciousness or living more multidimensionally, that those same few drops of food coloring of fear or whatever the slower vibration is in the ocean, it's much more diluted. It's back in the wholeness, back in the oneness, back in the source from which it came. So there's a lot that could be shared about multidimensionality, but what I'm sensing for this particular group that's connected to this conversation is also a real freedom to not to open up to communicating however it is that you communicate. You know, I remember when I was doing massage years ago, that there was really a lot of encouragement to kind of mainstream what it was that I did and talked about the benefits, and like it wasn't really who I was. And so the more kind of quote unquote out there, or just using the language that comes normally to me, that's also enhanced my signature essence and visibility and contribution. And so I see that a lot with others, and that's what's coming up. Like anywhere we might have hidden or not fully expressed because we thought somebody wouldn't understand, that from a multidimensional level, we can be expressing without contorting or distorting or shifting, like really the authentic voice. And so what you might be transmitting from the 8th dimension would have a different quality or language than what you might be transmitting from the 3rd or the 5th or the 20th dimension. So that was a lot there in a compact way, but that's what I would say about multidimensional living.
Oh, it was a beautiful answer, Danielle, and I just got so many visuals that were powerful and that resonated with me regarding wholeness. We had talked about, the past lives sort of being layered one upon the other in a sense of wholeness, where they're all sort of influencing each other and bleeding through. And so that feels the same way to me with sort of multidimensionality, that all these different multidimensional aspects of ourselves are also always layered and accessible, and they influence one another. And the more that we can connect into those multidimensional aspects, the more that we become more whole, and also that would in turn raise our vibrational frequency, I would imagine, as you tune into the higher dimensional aspects of yourself.
Yes, and that also can be an aspect of it, that as we increase our vibration, then the slower vibrations come up to the surface to be included in the oneness or in the wholeness. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that, like, it's one thing to kind of have an idea of, well, what is living in unity consciousness, or how is the journey into having more and more moments of living in unity consciousness, and then the experience of it. And so that's the other thing that's coming to me to say, is that to not stop for someone as you're on your journey and you're noticing that there may be more moments or an intensity or slower vibrations are coming up, that doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong, that it can simply be a part of the process, and to allow the energy to keep moving, just like the pond turns over as it's cleaning itself, as the mud comes to the surface. And so the higher vibrations also, from my experience, include those slower vibrations, because they're not separate anymore. They're coming into the oneness, into the wholeness. And yet, of course, we have our consciousness, our capacity to focus on what it is that we want to be focusing on, that all that there is exists in each and every moment. So bliss is in each and every moment. And that is also retraining, because the mind may have a habit of looking for what's not going well, or having a hypervigilance or control or those kinds of things, and using the same strength of the mind yet to be focusing on, well, what is already in alignment, what is going well, looking to enhance that, and not ignoring, because I think that I also saw that, with The Secret and those kinds of things as it came out, that then people were afraid to say that they were having a slower vibrational thing. And so they stopped talking about it, but it was still in their vibration. So not to ignore what's going on. In the Counts of Light book, they talk about, like, having, if you're a director of a play and you're having a strong, slower vibrational emotion, just like to be on the stage and play it full out, but like for 5 seconds, not necessarily for 5 days.
Yes, I so appreciate how you transform letting go into integrating. And you talked about in one of your YouTube presentations that we've spent so much time, trying to clear and let go of these aspects of our life experience, as if they're bad and they don't belong and we need to get rid of them. And I resonated so powerfully. It was really transformational for me personally, to integrate all of myself, all of my life experiences, past lives included, everything I've ever said and done and felt, integrating it into the wholeness of who I am, rather than thinking I need to get rid of things about my life experience or things about myself or my personality. So thank you so much for that. I really want to convey that to the audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just reading in the Tablets of Light before we connected the chapter about the ring of inclusion and the meditation of really including all of those repetitive patterns or distractions and into the ring of inclusion. And for me, that was also such a powerful shift from the Council of Light, that there was so much focus a few decades ago of releasing and letting go, and my experience is that it would release and then it would come back, and then release and come back, and really seeing that it's all energy, and that as we're in this heart center, in this vibration, love includes all that there is. And from that resourcefulness, that as we're the ocean and we're including those slower vibrations or the aspects of us that we may judge as good or bad, then they're a part of the wholeness. And that's also the disintegration or the reintegration of thinking so much separation or feeling so much separation to really being in that unity. There's one transmission where Toth talks about preferring the unpreferred. And that I know for myself, and I've seen it a lot for others, like we can go through the exact same experience, and sometimes we may think it's preferred, and sometimes we might think it's unpreferred. And so that's also why there's so much focus on the internal landscape and having a greater inner connection to ourselves, and that can create a sense of equanimity, that we're not like flowing in the wind based on what's going on around us, yet really able to stay connected from that internal connection. And I'm feeling the team starting to come in. They've been here, but they're knocking on the door.
Really look forward to the divine transmission. And so we'll just touch on the Tablets of Light briefly. I highly recommend it to all of our audience members. And so let's not give too much of it away, but on sort of in alignment with what you were just saying, positioning and oracular vision, really comes to mind and was an important part for me in the tablets of light, that integrates that concept about everything is laying the foundation that positions you to manifest your oracular vision. And I think you really speak to pioneers and innovators and those who have a sincere desire to contribute to the evolution of consciousness. And so it's important, I think, that recognition that everything that has happened up to this point, including this now moment, is positioning us to manifest our oracular vision.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, and the Council of Light book of Manifesting the Deepest Desires of the Soul has a chapter on positioning, and that, just as you shared, that it's the essence of positioning is really that we are, from our signature energy, like this lock and key, and we're positioning ourselves for ourselves, by ourselves, in co-creation for those optimal experiences and individuals and now moments. And that was a real game changer for me as well, because there can be so much of a shift of a focus at times of kind of like, well, is this good or bad? Or to really think, okay, this is all, it all has purpose. And it doesn't mean that we don't continue to evolve or desire that things shift, or sometimes it just comes in like shuffling the deck. It's not really there to stay, and the honoring of each and every moment. And the oracular vision, the first chapter in the Tablets of Light, really speaks to that we each have an oracular vision that we've come in with, and then how it is that we see the world, our unique perspective that enhances the probability that it happens. And so the oracular, like the oracle, and the vision, the mission that we have. And absolutely that there's that pioneering, that innovation, and then it's kind of like unpacking what our oracular vision is, especially from my perspective that there's another evolutionary stage that we're in. So we may have been carrying consciousness throughout this incarnation thus far that's been in a dormant state, that now really is the time for it to awaken, and for us all each, if we're choosing to bring our part of the equation. And there's so many beautiful analogies in the Tablets of Light that Toph talks about, of like, if we're going on a picnic, and there's 25 of us going on the picnic, and we've been carrying a part of what's going to be that picnic in our backpack, but maybe alone it didn't really make sense. And yet when we unpack it and put it all on the altar, then there's a greater awareness of how it makes sense as a part of a larger sequence, or this shift into co-creation, collaboration, and really that we're moving together through this evolution of consciousness.